Uh,
I'm sorry, in our area, power supply interrupts. That's why
okay.
our
Oh, okay.
uh,
Okay. So,
I'm
uh,
sharing the
can
slide.
you
Yes,
wait? Can you give the slide? I have not number of slides. The next
yes,
slide, if you remember.
yes, yes. Can you see the uh, slide?
Yes, next slide, please. Next.
Oh,
I
okay.
explain that. See, this is a preference as I mentioned. And next slide, I have explained that. So this is a formal, if you trust me, if you trust me, you can see in this very quickly, in that case, that given what I have called high transitivity for interval orders, that you will obtain something which will violate the property of the high transitivity. So next slide. It's easier, in fact. So I have already explained that with the Pareto extension rule. So you can go to the next slide. What is very interesting, I think, in the social choice function approach is that we will get exactly the same result as the result obtained in the previous case with no limited liberalism. When the condition was liberalism, not limited. So I give you the definition of what is limited liberalism in the framework of social choice function. So it's exactly the same. No, it is not exactly the same. Well, what you have is this. Whenever you have individual I prefer AI to BI, if BI belongs to the choice, then AI will belong to the choice too. This is the difference. In the case of when it was not limited liberalism, what we obtained was that BI could not be in the choice set if AI belonged to the subset A. Here, I accept that BI be chosen in the set A, but in that case, AI, if it belongs to A, of course, can be chosen too. So next slide, please. So I again try to persuade you persuade you that it is a relevant definition. Let me be the concerned individual and A and B be two identical social states, except that in A, I write this paper using a Japanese fountain pen in blue lacquer, while in B, I write using an Italian fountain pen in celluloid. I slightly prefer the Japanese lacquer pen. And of course, if I use the previous definition of liberalism, I cannot use the Italian pen, since now with the limited liberalism condition, if the Italian pen is chosen, that is I use the Italian pen, then I could likewise use the Japanese pen too. So that's the difference. Next slide. So I will shorten my presentation now because, well, it's only the minimal limited liberalism condition as applied to two individuals, as previously. Next slide. Ronnie, next slide, please.
Yeah.
So this is the second theorem. If the number of individuals is 2, there is no social choice function satisfying the condition of Pareto condition applied to social choice function and the condition minimal limited liberalism. So it is exactly, except for the clause that the set A, B is not the same as the set CD, and that there are at least 4 elements, it is exactly the same result as in the case of non-limited liberalism condition. And I can give you again the example of garlic and perfume. I recall the example. Next slide. So I consider set ABCD, and you see that both individuals prefer B to C. So C cannot be chosen. And they both prefer D to E, so A cannot be chosen. Now you take the contraposition of B belong to C de A, C of A implies A belongs to C of A. Is A does not belong to C de E implies B does not belong to C of A. Then you apply the minimal liberalism condition, limited liberalism condition to this contraposition, and you see that you will empty the set A, B, C, D. It has been already, well, A and B, sorry, C, A and C have already been excluded, and now you have excluded two A and B. So there is nothing left. So there are similarities and differences between Arrovian impossibility theorems and sense results. Among the similarities, one can observe the Arrovian theorem have been obtained by Blow and Blair and Pollack, showing that Arrow's impossibility theorem for social welfare function were essentially preserved when the social preference was requested to be a semi-order or an interval order rather than a complete pre-order. So, and the major differences between arrows and sense impossibility results concern the rule of independence of irrelevant alternatives. As you have seen, there is nothing about independence of irrelevant alternatives in sense theorem. Another important difference is that we do not need to make an assumption about the finiteness of the set of individuals. Last remark, of course, the proofs of sense theorem are very easy. It is sufficient to give appropriate profiles. Next slide, please, Ronnie. Well, what is very important in sense approach also, which has not been mentioned until then, is that the notion of welfarism. Welfarism is the idea that only relevant information passing normative judgments is utility information. As a consequence, if we consider two social states N and B, for which we have the same utility information for the agents, and two social states C and D for which we have also the same information, and if it happens, say, that the social welfare associated to A is greater than the social welfare associated to C, then the social welfare associated to B is also greater than the social welfare associated to D. Next slide. But here you see that you have specific option on which individuals, well, at least two individuals, have some power. And the welfarism I mentioned previously has a formal presentation in social choice with preferences, and it is sometimes called neutrality. Neutrality meaning more or less that the name of the social states do not matter. And well, I would say that this is a neutrality, a preference-based neutrality, because the fact that the name does not matter is also a neutrality which could be obtained by combinatorial comments. If you make a transposition of options, you must transpose the results, which is not the reference-based neutrality. Well, it's a bit complicated and a bit formal here, but I think the notion is quite important for that reason. Also, we have seen in the example that individuals are apparently concerned uh, by the others. You know, in the preferences you give, if you look at the preferences of the prude and the lascivious, there are some externalities. Well, the economists speak of externalities. And in the example of garlic and perfume I gave, also you see that in the preference, individual preference, we can see that there is some externality. You construct your preference by letting the individuals having some preference about options which does not concern them, which is externality. Well, one of my friend Peter Hammond said that in this case we should assume that if you have the limited power on two options, because it is your sphere of action, then all the other individuals must be indifferent about these two options. But I think it's not true. They are not indifferent. It is externality. So the examples are very much related to externalities. This is my last slide, and it is a quote from On Liberté by John Stuart Mill. And it says essentially what is in sense version of liberalism. There is a sphere of action in which society is distinguished from the individual as if any only an indirect interest, comprehending that all persons of person's life and conduct which affects only himself, or if it affects others, only with their free, voluntary, and decisive consent participation. So there is a personal sphere. The problem here is also for me is well, regards externalities and regards also why having social preferences in that case, if
Thank
the sphere
you.
action is not, wait, sorry, for
Uh,
me, and it's not clear for me what he means here, but I think we can interpret that as sen liberalism condition. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Maurice, and uh, for your very crystal clear presentation, and and I know some of my
Excuse me.
part.
Excuse me. May I like make a question? Just a quick question or two questions about this.
Okay,
Although
Raphael.
it should, yes, Chula.
Oh,
There are
yes,
two
yes,
things.
sure, sure,
Thanks.
sure.
Does externality violate IIA principle?
uh,
The interaction among, I mean, the last slide. So the interaction among individuals.
yeah, no, well, I don't think it's very difficult. Well, the externality is introduced here uh, in the examples, but I don't think it has something to see with IIA.
So it does not deal, or it violates IIA, or it really doesn't deal with IIA. So it's just another thing.
And no, well, no, it doesn't. Well, there is no IIA in
Okay.
this presentation, you know. But I think you would not violate IIA.
IIA. Okay. And can you repeat the definition of neutrality, preference-based neutrality? Because I couldn't
Yes,
hear
yes.
well.
Well,
Thanks.
you have seen what you have seen welfarism. But you can welfarism. You have, I think, in a sense definition of welfarism, you have the reference to utility functions and utility information. If you have in information in term of preference, and if you have exactly the same kind of information, for instance, in individual Mr. 1 prefer A to C in one case, and B to D in the other case. Mr. 2 is indifferent between A and C in one case, and is indifferent also between B and D in the other case, and so on, for each individual. Exactly the same information in terms of preferences. Well, the condition of neutrality says that if, well, say A is socially preferred to B, then C will be socially preferred to D, something like that.
So the other example you make in the slide.
Yeah. For instance, that is related to IIA. That is a kind of generalization of IIA.
Yes, that's okay.
IIA
Then
is a case you have neutrality if you take A and B exactly be the same as C and D.
okay, because
And
you're dealing with just information regarding utility, and the information is the same in each state or in each.
welfarism, so in
I
the
apologize.
preference
Sorry.
based neutrality, you take the information you are taking is only an information in terms of preference. So the
Regarding preferences, okay.
binary relations only.
Now it's clear.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I understand.
Thank you. Our respected Professor Yangsheng Su raised his hand. Please unmute and ask question to Professor Maurice.
Okay, and I have two perhaps questions or inquiries. One is about this externality. Suppose we view externality as something like harm done to the other individual. So in that case, if we go back to John Stuart Mill, and he would not agree that in this case we should intervene. That is, I was wondering how would you think about that? So that is one question. The other question, the query, is the following. So in the whole exercise, this notion of respecting rights seems to sort of the burden of respecting rights basically is on the social welfare judgments or the social choice function. And but sometimes we might also have different sort of intuitions about respecting rights. So typically, I was thinking things like, well, if I want to respect others' rights, and I agree if that is that person's personal things, then perhaps I should try to avoid making any social welfare judgments about the business of that person concerning his or her own private matters. So in this regard, the burden is not on the aggregation rule. It is on other fellow individuals, fellow citizens in society. So I was wondering how you would sort of view about this different intuition from intuition that you have been clearly elaborating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yongsheng. Well, your two questions are related. Well, you are right. With John Stuart Mill, we have the impression that in this individual sphere, there will be nothing to try to go towards a social preference. This is personal sphere. This concerns the individuals, and that's all. There is the society has no right to intervene. So in that sense, would mean that we don't have to speak of aggregation when you have individual rights. And you must not have to look for social preference or social choice in that case. But after all, if you look at the example I gave and the example given by Amartya, well, he gave a lot of examples. By the way, I gave only the lady Chateau's Lovers example, which is the first one he gave in 1970. But if you look at example, also I remember I gave example also with shirts and
Professor
people
Maurice.
liking uniformity and so on.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Professor
And
Maurice, Professor Prashanto Patnaik will raised his hand, and he will definitely. Professor Prashanto Patnaik, sir, can you unmute? But before that, I want to know, Professor Yangsheng Zhu, that all your question has been addressed, or left some of the parts behind?
Well, I will perhaps hear what Prashanta, Professor Padnak is going to say, and then I will respond.
And
Okay.
well, for the second question, I would say that what I said about Peter Hammond is going in the same direction. He says that if someone has individual rights, then regarding two options, then the other individual should be indifferent between the two options. So they are not concerned in some sense. I don't know if it answers your question, Yongsheng.
Perhaps
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in the sense that for the kind of externalities, and I was thinking, I mean, the example is that you were talking about the garlic lover and garlic hater, and perfume lover and perfume hater. So there, and so I mean, in one case, I mean, in one sense, it is one person's sort of private matters, but it sort of puts some externalities on the other person. So in the sense that it harms the other person's well-being tremendously, perhaps, especially if that person is allergic to whatever the other person is doing. So with that, and now if we go back to John Stuart Mill, and I'm not quite sure how he would respond. Well, in this case, because it has harm on others, and then perhaps this respecting rights may not be adequate, may not be proper or appropriate in this case. So that is my sort of concern. So I don't know.
Yes, you are right. Yes.
Thank you.
Professor Prashant, sir, please unmute. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
What I was going to comment is closely related to Yongsheng's point, closely related to also the criticism of a large number of people, including me, and of course, including the origin of the criticism in social choice literature by Robert Nozick, which we sort of try to extend, and also related to John Stuart Mill. Let me raise the point. Now, when we think about individual right, typically we think of individual versus the society in some generalized sense. Now, how do we typically talk about individual right? We talk about there are certain things about which the society has nothing to say. That if I'm Hindu, if I'm practicing Hinduism in the privacy of my home, and I'm not going around talking about Hinduism to others, not preaching to them, I'm not trying to say that this is the only right religion, etc., then there is absolutely no reason, Mill would say, and I would say also that according to our notion of rights, individual right, there should not be any scope for the society to talk about it at all. And typically this right will be specified by specifying what I can do or cannot do. The consideration behind that will be, of course, this sort of consideration, what is my privacy, etc. But this is the way we typically specify individual rights, that no matter how am I practicing Hinduism in the privacy of my home, how much it offends the other people, even if they just know that I'm practicing Hinduism, but they have no occasion to interact with me, that fact offends them. Then Mill would say, and our ordinary language about individual rights as it's used in legal literature, that would say that, look, you have no business to talk about it at all. Take it away completely outside the social choice mechanism, etc., etc. That's we typically talk about individual rights with respect to privacy. But you say that, okay, it doesn't concern others. In this case, it is causing externality in the economic sense of the term externality. Other people are feeling unhappy. The fact that I'm practicing it in my privacy is offending them. But then Mill would say they have no business to be offended, and if they're offended, it doesn't matter. I'm not doing any tangible harm to them. Now, Mill made a distinction between the type of externality that causes tangible harm and intangible harm. Now, there's been a lot of philosophical discussion about what is tangible and what is not tangible, but I think he has a very fundamental point. Therefore, that is the reason, for example, Nozick, Bob Sogden, then Kotaro Suzumura, Wolf Gartner, and myself, we felt very strongly that Sen's formulation of liberalism is extremely inadequate. It is allowing certain things to come into the externalities, etc., into the picture in a way which has no business to be there. And that's why we tended to reject Sen's formulation. So I would say that what Yongsheng is saying, and what John Stuart Mill was saying, and what a lot of other people, including Kotaro and Wolf Gartner and myself, we are saying, it is related to that other thing. In legally, you do not bring these things into the picture at all in legal sphere about what is privacy. When we talk about it, we do not refer to these so-called intangible harms. They are feeling offended, but there is a distinction between what they should feel offended about and what they should not feel offended about. It is that aspect of it which was completely ignored in the Sen's formulation. That rights is about what you can do, cannot do. It's not about what you prefer and you don't prefer. That's the point that I wanted to mention.
Great. Professor Maurice, would you like to respond?
Oh, no, I have nothing to say. No, it's well.
Yeah. My friend Alex from Germany, he has a question or a couple of questions. Please go ahead.
It's actually building on quite a lot of what we already the previous questions. I think firstly, John Stuart Mill himself talks about certain limitations of choice. I think he has mostly sort of racist reasons for doing that, but he also mentions children, that we have to be informed, that we have to be consenting adults and all of those things. And you could make an argument that the sort of rationality constraints you see within the social choice theory relate or mirror the sort of rationality conditions that Mill himself set for freedom of choice. So that's the first thing I just want to pick your brain about and see if what you think about that. And then I quickly want to talk about negative externalities, but also positive externalities, which I think is sort of missing from the discussion. So in terms of negative externalities, it's very easy to talk about the fact that we ought not to enter someone else's sphere of their own space to express and live themselves, or care, like have others concerning desires or preferences. But to some degree, I think there are social norms and mores that we often express in these cases. So, for example, we wouldn't accept consensual cannibalism being practiced in a home, even if it's the case that it's consensual, even if we don't see it, because we think there are moral reasons for not doing so, rather than externality reasons for not doing so. And so what role does social preferences play when they are normative social preferences? And then when it comes to positive externalities, a lot of the discussion about rights seems to be about negative rights, where we don't have positive duties to make sure that people have access to healthcare or education or any of those things. And so to what extent do our duties to others factor into social choice theory?
Well, I don't. Well, it's not really a question. Well, we can agree. Well, I think you are going in the same direction as Prashanta, and sure, if you consider that rights is about what can be done or cannot be done, it's not social choice is not the appropriate framework to deal with this. It remains that the examples are here, and I am rather convinced by the example. As you can see in the examples, what is very peculiar is the individual preferences. What they have, how they have preferences when the first individual has funny preferences about the two options of the other individual. And that's the externality problem, which, but we could just perhaps not speak of rights, but I don't know, say something about externalities. And how can we deal with externalities within social choice theory? I don't know. Perhaps it could be a reinterpretation of all the formalism. You can keep the results and the formal results and interpret them differently. I suspect that this is possible, even for percentage. But probably we have to forget about rights and what we can do, what we cannot do, because in fact it is about preferences. And we are not mentioning the right to do. It's a right to prefer something to. But perhaps, I don't know. Well, thank you anyway.
Thank you, Alex. Right. Professor Prashanto, may I request you to recap or just give an overview of the whole lecture, because some of our participants who are not familiar with equations and symbols, for their better understanding, can you may I request you to say something on the main or the gist of the presentation because some of our participants' background did not allow them to access equation or equations and some abstract things.
Okay, Maurice, first I would like to say that Maurice has given a wonderful lecture where he has brought a lot of complex things from Arrow's framework and put in a very systematic fashion so that one can see what exactly
Yes,
is playing. So I would
exactly.
first like to express my appreciation to this wonderful lecture of Maurice. And then to your point, I am not sure that I can do a better job than Maurice has done, but let me try to at least make a few comments. Now, the thing that as I see it, one fundamental point that Maurice has addressed is this distinction between welfarism and non-welfarism. What type of information you want to take into account in the following sense. There are certain types of information we would like to take into account, but that's not the only type of information that we may like to confine ourselves to. There may be other types. Our problem with classical welfare economics was we were exclusively focused on utility. Utility in whatever sense you interpret it, whether it is in terms of preference satisfaction or whether it is cardinal utility happiness or whatever sense, we are focused only on utility. But there are things other than utility that matter for the individual, matter for the society. Consider, for example, the following case. Utilities are exactly the same as before, but certain things we think from a purely intuitive point of view, not by any social decision or anything, certain things which we think are basically immoral, the point that a previous commenter made, certain things are basically immoral, we feel. Then we may like to take into account. There are also certain things that we would like to take into account. What type of society are we living in? And for example, in a dictatorial regime, I'm trying to formulate my language carefully so that I don't offend any type of regime that I have no right to be offended about. Now, consider a society where neighbors are informing on each other to a dictator. And then consider another society where neighbors are not informing each other, they are abstaining from informing. In terms of utility, it may be exactly the same. But what type of society would you like to live in? Would you like to live in a society where neighbors are informing on each other to the dictator, and therefore all of us are getting cut down to nothing? Or we are living in a society we don't inform, and because we don't inform, the dictator becomes furious and cuts us down to size by punishing us all. Now, even if the utilities are exactly the same, would you like to live in a society where regularly the neighbors are sending report to the dictatorial society? I don't think anybody would say yes. And I personally intuitively feel, even if our utilities are exactly the same, we would say yes. There are numerous examples like this. Then we should not be then confining ourselves to social decision making. We should not be confining ourselves only to the utilities. We should take into account these other things. Some of these other things are what Mill was saying, that your private life is your private life. We may disagree about privacy, but there are certain notions of privacy which probably we would not disagree about. Then would you not put some respect for privacy into the social decision-making mechanism? Utilitarianism again feels miserably to take into account this sort of thing. So that is an extremely valuable thing which Maurice has done in his lecture,
Yes.
and giving formal sort of formulation for this sort of thing. I shall stop there. I'm probably talking too much.
No, no, it's very valuable comments and that we have. Professor Maurice, may I request you to your concluding remarks on the questions that came to you and the comments and from your lecture. Please sum up and can you say some brief remarks in the conclusion?
Yeah, thank you. Well, when I started, I mentioned that it will strictly be the descent of Amartya Sen's paper. So I didn't want to explore the other aspects which has been worked on since 1917. I mentioned the papers by Gardenforth and by Gartner, Prashanta, and Kotaro, Wolf Gartner, Prashanta Patanek, and Kotaro Suzumura. And on the other hand, what I have shown is that the technical result of Amartya Sen is extremely robust. And in particular, if you consider one framework, which is a social choice function framework, since you weaken the liberalism condition and you obtain exactly the same impossibility with in the framework of social choice functions. So this result is extremely robust. Of course, if you interpret, as I mentioned, the set of social, you have to consider the set of social states. And, we speak of social states very lightly, I would say, and when we in some cases, like for Arrow, social states are the traditional social states we have, but also the candidate to an election. It's true in all he says. The two aspects are considered, and it is due to Amartya Sen to see that there were two aspects in the aggregation problem and two different intuitive things behind them. And that's I mentioned again in the introduction to the book by Eric Maskin and Amartya Sen. The introduction by Prashanta is very clear on that, and I recommend. I know that Rajat Deb has already recommended that everyone reads this introduction. And here, I would say that we need to have people who reflect on the nature of the set X of social states. And most of the case it is given, and that's all. And I think there is much to say, and probably with consequences, formal consequences also, and on the structure. Well, for instance, it has been mentioned by Prashanta on the impossibility theorems and the possibility theorems with majority rule, for instance, that the conditions could not resist the passage to the from one dimension to two dimensions. Famous results by Gerald Kramer. And yes, in some sense, but this is also a fact due to the, that we consider a formal structure implicit. We have always this, I think, this vector space things of the real space thing behind the head when we speak of social states or when we speak, well, and I think we should reflect on the set of social states. What is a social state? Well, perhaps it would be my conclusion.
Right. Distinguished colleagues, dear friends and participants, as we come to the close of session 9 of Individual Wellbeing and Social Welfare Study Circle, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the richness of the intellectual journey we have shared this evening. Tonight's lecture on individual rights and social welfare has offered us more than analytical clarity. It has provided a deeply thoughtful engagement with one of the most enduring and challenging questions in social philosophy and welfare economics: how societies can uphold individual rights while pursuing collective well-being. On behalf of the study circle and the Banglar Pathshala Foundation, I extend our deepest gratitude to Professor Maurice Salles for an illuminating, rigorous, and profoundly ethical presentation. His lecture reminded us that rights are not merely institutional constraints, nor is welfare a matter of aggregate outcomes alone. Rather, the relationship between the two must be understood through careful reasoning, moral seriousness, and respect for human dignity. Professor Maurice Salles' insights have helped us appreciate the delicate tension between individual freedom and social choice, between normative principles and practical policy design. His contribution reinforces a central conviction of this study circle that sound economic reasoning must remain a continuous dialogue with philosophy, ethics, and democratic values. I would also like to sincerely thank our participants who joined and from Bangladesh, South Asia, Europe, and beyond. Your attentive presence, thoughtful questions, reflections, engagement transform this session into a truly dialogic space, one where learning is shared, contested, and collectively advanced. This study circle was conceived as a space of slow, serious, respectful thinking about well-being, justice, and social welfare. Tonight's discussion reaffirms the importance of such space, especially in a world increasingly marked by inequality, polarization, and moral uncertainty. As we conclude, let us carry forward the question raised this evening: how do we design institutions that respect rights without sacrificing social responsibility? How do we ensure that welfare policies enhance rather than diminish human agency? And how can normative reasoning guide us toward more just and humane society? Once again, Professor Salles, thank you for your generosity, clarity, and intellectual leadership. We are truly grateful for your time and engagement. Thank you to all participants for being part of this session. I from my heart thank you all. We look forward to welcoming you to our upcoming next Saturday session by Professor Kaushik Boshu, and we will continue this collective pursuit of understanding and justice. With these words, I formally bring the session 9 of IWSW Study Circle to a close. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Corey.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Namaskar. Namaskar.